Jenny, rank your favorite races in order.
What?
It's just a thought experiment, Jenny. No one will get mad at you.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm white, so white, and then I love Indian food, so maybe that would be two.
We were talking about World of Warcraft.
Oh my god.
Hey folks, this is Astus. I am so excited for this video. In this video, I will be going through all of the racial options in the game of Baldur's Gate 3 and ranking them on a tier list, with the focus on tactics and optimization. If you aren't familiar with me, I make videos about tactics and optimization in CRPGs, but in particular Baldur's Gate 3. I covered early access extensively. Since full release, I've been working very hard to master this game so I can get back to making the tier list content that I am known for. This will be my first of many tier lists for the full release of Baldur's Gate 3. Now, before we actually start ranking the races, there's a few things I need to say first. First thing is that all of the rankings in this video and in my other videos are going to assume certain self-imposed rules that you will be following to make the game more difficult. Of course, you don't have to follow them. I do, and those are the rules that I make my content for. The rules are aimed at making the game more difficult, but also to preserve tactical depth. There's a lot of options in this game which you can abuse that actually eliminate the tactics and would make any discussion like the one in this video very boring. So just a quick gloss over the rules. For example, I assume tactician difficulty, no karmic dice, no reloading, limited respecs, and limited long rests. If you want more details on these rules, I have linked the reference sheet to them in the description of this video. The other thing I want to say before we dive in is what the tiers in this tier list actually mean. I think in order for this to have meaning, you actually have to define what a tier is. So we can go through those really quickly. I've borrowed a 5-tier system from the brilliant original Baldur's Gate series YouTuber and streamer Devayorn. At the top is S tier. An S tier race, in my opinion, is one that is highly impactful to your build. So these are races that offer highly impactful features that are often hard to get or even impossible to get from the other parts of your build, parts like itemization or your class features. So that is S tier. A tier are races that offer a handful of impactful features, maybe even highly impactful features, but probably they are ones that you can more easily get from other parts of your build. Then there's B tier. These are races that offer just a few impactful features, so as a result, they're not very impactful to your build, but they're never a detriment to your build. C tier are choices which I consider just weak compared to other options. The things that they offer you can easily get from other places, and so they're pretty much a net neutral. And then finally, the last tier is RP tier, which stands for roleplay tier. These are options which are completely outcompeted by other options that you can select, and as a result, the only reason to select them is for roleplay reasons. Now, I consider roleplay reasons to be good reasons to select a race. I do not call this tier RP tier in order to denigrate roleplay. Quite the opposite, I want to recognize that there are good reasons to pick an option that are outside the scope of this video, which is tactical optimization. Alright, so those are the tiers. Let's get into the races now, starting with Dwarves. I'm doing these in no particular order. It's roughly alphabetical, I think, starting with Dwarf. So the first thing to notice here isn't actually what Dwarves get, but it's what they don't get, which is any attribute bonuses. If you are familiar with my work in early access, you know that a big thing that I ranked races on back then was what attribute bonuses they got. So for example, a race that got a +2 to strength tended to be a really good race, regardless of what their other racial features were. But all of that has changed now in full release. Larian has made it so that your attribute bonuses are completely separate to your race. All characters in the game now get a +2 to an attribute of their stat, of their choice, and a +1 to an attribute of their choice. You select that here, so I could add to dexterity, to strength, you get the idea. That means what we're actually ranking the races on now is their racial features. This stuff right here and for sub-races. So I just wanted to make a note of that. This applies to all of the races I'm going to be reviewing. It's just a big change from early access, So the Dwarf base offers several features. They have a racial speed of 7.5 meters per turn. I believe this is 25 feet if you use the feet system. The conversion is 1.5 meters to 5 feet. So I probably won't mention, I'll just go in meters because that's what I use. I won't mention the feet from now on. 7.5 meters is one less than standard. So this actually isn't a feature, it's a negative. They have one less movement. Now, that can be a pain, but there are very easy ways to get around a low movement. Spells like Longstrider, Crusher's Ring, Haste, basically give you all the movement that you need. So taking a small negative to movement is never really a problem for me. Besides that, they get Dwarven combat training. This gives them proficiency with battle axes, hand axes, light hammers, and war hammers. Weapon proficiencies aren't usually as useful as armor proficiencies, but hey, it's nice, we'll take it. This would be an example of a feature which I consider low impact. They get Dark Vision up to 12 meters. Dark Vision is great. There's so many dark places in this game, and if you cannot see in the dark, you have disadvantage on your attacks, which really, really sucks. That said, a standard 12 meter Dark Vision is pretty easy to get from other parts of your build. I consider 12 meter Dark Vision to be Dark Vision for melee attackers. If you are a ranged attacker, you probably want longer than 12 meters for your Dark Vision, because you want to be really pushing the limits of your range in order to benefit from it maximally, and the limits of your range is going to be much far beyond 12 meters. 12 meters is the kind of movement where some enemies in the game can easily close a distance on you. So Dark Vision, standard Dark Vision is mostly for melee builds in my opinion. And then dwarves get Dwarven Resilience, which gives them advantage on saving throws against poison and resistance to poison damage. This is a highly impactful feature. It is pretty easy to get resistances in this game, especially through spells like Warding Bond, but you cannot get Warding Bond on every character in your party. So resistances are still good, and poison is a very common damage type, especially in what I consider the hardest act of the game, which is in Act 1. You face two bosses in that game which will deal a lot of poison damage, and having resistance to that poison damage halves it. Very, very valuable. But beside that, this is also giving you advantage on a saving throw against a fairly common condition, which is the poison condition. Poison condition gives you disadvantage on attack rolls, similar to if you don't have Dark Vision, and that sucks. So advantage on saving throws against it, awesome. But that's just the base race. Now let's talk about the sub-races. If you aren't familiar with 5e, all dwarves get the base dwarf features, but they'll also get a few bonuses from their sub-race. So Gold Dwarf, for example, gets Dwarven Toughness on top of everything that we covered over here. So Dwarven Toughness, this increases your hit point maximum by 1 and 1 for every level. So it's a little bit like having a +2 Constitution, but only insofar as it affects your hit points, not for your Constitution saving throws or anything like that. Hit points are very valuable, but this isn't really offering that much. By late game, this is 12 extra hit points. That's not a highly impactful feature, but it is impactful. This is a good example of a low impact feature. I rank the Gold Dwarf a B tier. They're a good tanky race. The standout feature is the resistance to poison, but there are a lot of other races that offer that, and there's a lot of other features in the game that offer that. So B tier for Gold Dwarf. Next up, Shield Dwarf. Besides everything else that dwarves get, they will get Dwarven Armor training. This gives them proficiency in light and medium armor. This is really good on caster class builds which don't otherwise get armor proficiencies. Getting to medium armor proficiency really opens up a lot of options in your build. Not only are you getting more AC, increasing your durability, but there's also just some items like gloves, helmets, and boots, which count as medium armor, and you cannot wear them and cast spells at the same time, for example. So Getting medium armor is a highly impactful feature, but it is a feature that you can pretty easily get in other parts of your build. Frankly, I prefer shield proficiencies over medium armor proficiencies, but if you are making a build that really revolves around certain pieces of equipment that are medium armor, it is crucial to get this. So, altogether, Shield Dwarf can be the perfect race for some builds, but in general, I count it as B tier. And then finally, we get to Duergar, or the Underdark version of Dwarves. They get 2 features. One is Superior Dark Vision. This is a 24 meter version of Dark Vision, which will replace the standard Dark Vision. And just like the 12 meter one was good for melee attackers, Superior Dark Vision is good for ranged attackers, because now you can actually start pushing the limits of your ranged weapons and still benefit from Dark Vision. Also, Superior Dark Vision is something that's actually very difficult to get from other parts of your build. So this is very important on ranged builds, very impactful feature. Then they also get Dwarven Resilience, which gives them advantage on saving throws against illusions, and against being charmed or paralyzed. And the paralyzed, here's the big one. I consider paralyzation to be the most debilitating condition that you commonly face in the game. You'll face it in the early game, you'll face it in the late game, and all through the game, it can completely end an encounter if you fail a saving throw against paralyzed. So getting advantage on saving throws, all saving throws against this particular condition, it is so hard to express how important this is. It's so good. Extremely strong. Both of these highly impactful features. And this isn't actually all of it. Duergar also get racial spells as they level up, and so those aren't displayed in character creation, which only displays level 1. So I can just tell you here, at 3rd level, Duergar will get the Enlarge spell, which they can cast only on themselves as an action once per long rest. Enlarge spell is the kind of spell which is very good in a few limited situations. And basically those situations are anywhere where being shoved or displaced can just instant kill you. So if you're fighting next to lava, if you're fighting next to a giant pit, if you're fighting next to a cliff, getting pushed can just completely eliminate your character from the encounter. Enlarging yourself is a great way to defend against being pushed. In the first case, because you are now a large creature, and a lot of medium-sized creatures are just creatures with low strength, physically cannot push large creatures. They don't even let you make the roll. So it just gives you immunity to shoves against many of the enemies that you're going to be facing, and then it also gives you advantage on strength saving throws, and a lot of displacements in this game are strength saving throws. So it's not a complete immunity to being displaced, but it is immunity to a lot of the common displacements that you need to worry about. So getting this once per long rest is actually really good. It's the kind of spell that you want to be able to cast once per long rest. Then, starting at level 5, Duergar get the ability to cast invisibility on themselves as an action once per battle. Outside of battle, this is an infinite cast spell like a cantrip. So, invisibility as a cantrip, this is so useful in so many situations outside of combat, and even inside of combat. Being able to go invisible to break engagement, amazing. I really love this on any assassin build, because starting off combat from invisibility, which you can do every single time if you're Duergar, except for 1 or 2 boss battles which start from dialogue, usually gives you a surprise round, and then that's where assassins really start to shine, is with surprise rounds. But even if you aren't an assassin, beginning combat with a surprise condition on your enemies is so valuable. And this makes Duergar the first S-tier race that we've covered. I mean, they're just so amazing. They might be the best race in the game. I'm partial to some of the other ones we're going to be talking about, but it's really hard to pass on this. On any kind of ranged attack build, or any kind of stealth build, Duergar, amazing. And that is it for the Dwarves. Okay, next up is Dragonborn. Dragonborn, as their base racial feature, they get a movement speed of 9 meters per turn. 9 meters is the standard movement speed that most races get, which means this isn't actually a feature, it's just blank. So really what Dragonborn get all come from their sub-races, and they have the most sub-races of any racial option. I believe there are 10 in total, which correspond to your particular draconic ancestry. Now, in Dungeons & Dragons, there are colored dragon types, like green, red, black, blue. Typically, these are evil-aligned dragons. And then there are metallic dragon types, like brass, bronze, copper, silver. You get the idea. These are typically good-aligned dragon types, but you can play them however you want. Let's look at what they actually get. Every Dragonborn subrace will get a breath weapon and a resistance, and the resistance will be the same damage type as their elemental breath weapon. So there's a few options. There's acid, lightning, fire, poison. I believe green is the only poison, and cold. So you're picking a breath weapon of that type and a resistance of that type. Now, the breath weapon does 2d6 damage to everyone in a small cone or beam. It varies depending on which one you pick. But the AoE is small, and it does 2d6 damage to everyone in that AoE if they fail a saving throw, which also varies. So for example, white has a con saving throw, but gold has a dex saving throw. Now, if they succeed on their saving throw, they'll take half that damage, so 1d6 at early levels. This refreshes on a short rest now instead of a long rest. That actually wasn't in the most recent patch notes, but I have been told that it is a short rest refreshing feature. And it also now scales with your level. I believe at level 6 and 11, it's going to gain an extra die 6, so it'll max out at level 11 at 4 die 6. This is a very lackluster damage ability. It's only really useful if you are picking a cold type or a lightning type, because those can get doubled against targets that are vulnerable to them with the Create Water spell. There are ways to force vulnerability on fire as well, so that might be an option. I haven't played around with this at all. Really, I just find the damage so unimpressive that unless it's being done to several vulnerable targets, it's probably not going to be worth your action to cast. So the big thing that you get from this is a elemental resistance that you can choose, and that's a little bit better in my mind than a set elemental resistance like Dwarves get or Tieflings get, which we'll cover in a bit. Being able to choose one theoretically allows you to really plan out your run, and you pick the specific damage type which you are expecting to need a resistance to. But resistances are pretty easy to get in this game, either through elixirs, through the Warding Bond spell, through itemization. So it's not that impactful of a feature. Altogether, I give every subrace of the Dragonborn a C tier. Next up on our list is Drow. Drow are a kind of elf, but because they get superior dark vision rather than normal dark vision as their core racial feature, they've actually ungrouped them from the elf. So I guess we'll just cover it Drow on its own. Drow features, they get a base racial speed of 9 meters, that's standard. They get Drow weapon training. This gives them proficiencies in rapiers, short swords, and hand crossbows. Now, hand crossbow is actually an important weapon proficiency because they're a very unique weapon. They are a one-handed, light, ranged weapon, which means you can dual-wield hand crossbows and use your bonus actions to make ranged attacks. And there's all kinds of bugs around this, bugs which haven't been fixed for so long, they're basically just core to the game now. For example, if you're making bonus action attacks with a hand crossbow, it will apply your dexterity modifier to the damage as if you had two-weapon fighting style, even if you don't. Now, maybe that's been patched out. I haven't actually tested it since the last patch, but I don't believe it is just from reading through. You can test that for yourself, or if you're in the future, you can test it. Regardless, just being able to make a ranged attack with your offhand is already very, very good. And you can only do that if you're proficient in hand crossbows. So picking Drow is actually a way to get that proficiency. Very nice. Next up is Superior Dark Vision. We talked about this earlier when we covered the Duergar. Superior Dark Vision is a highly impactful ability that's very hard to get from other parts of a build. I consider it Dark Vision for ranged attackers, and Drow are already getting proficiency in one of the best ranged weapons in the game, so you can see they're kind of set up to be ranged attackers. Then they get Fey Ancestry. This is a very common ability. All of the elves get Fey Ancestry, so we'll be talking about it on a lot of the options. So what this does is it gives you advantage on saving throws against being charmed, not a big deal. But the big thing is that magic cannot put you to sleep, and that is a big deal, especially early game. The sleep spell is a very reliable way for enemies to break your concentration or just to CC you in general. So being immune to being magically put to sleep, awesome. Also, even by mid to late game, one of the best control spells in the game is the sleep version of the Glyph of Warding, which is an AoE that can hit allies in the AoE. But because it does no damage, it just puts targets to sleep. If all of the allies in the AoE are immune to sleep because they have Fey Ancestry, then you can start really placing that AoE more freely, which is awesome. I consider Fey Ancestry to be a highly impactful feature, so already we can see the Drow has a handful of pretty good features. Subrace, they get 2 subraces which are entirely thematic. They don't add any other racial features. Oh, I forgot to cover their particular spell portfolio. So at level 1, as you can see, Drow gain the Dancing Lights cantrip. This is a cantrip which sheds light, which Drow don't usually need because they have Superior Dark Vision. So mostly for buffing allies, but it takes a concentration slot, and it's usually not worth your concentration slot. I will just say that. So I don't usually end up using Dancing Lights in most of my runs these days. At level 3, though, Drow will get Fairy Fire, which they can cast once per long rest. Fairy Fire is a great spell, also requires concentration, but it's actually good, so it's worth the concentration slot. And then at level 5, they will get the Darkness Spell. Darkness Spell is good. It is good, but nuanced. Getting once per long rest is nice, but not highly impactful in my opinion. Okay, so that's all the Drow features. I give the Drow an A tier. They're a very good race, especially good for any ranged attacker. The combination of Superior Dark Vision and Fey Ancestry is awesome. Alright, that's Drow. Next up is the Elves. There are 2 variations of Elves, High Elf and Wood Elf. Of course, we're going to start with their base racial features. It's going to be very similar to the Drow, as we discussed. Base racial speed of 9 meters, that's standard. You're going to get Elven weapon training, which gives them proficiency in longswords and short swords, and also short bows and longbows. I find I use the longbow proficiency quite a bit when I play an elf, and for the others, not really anything. This is a low impact feature as far as I'm concerned. Then they get Dark Vision, another low impact feature. It's good for melee builds, but it's pretty easy to get from other parts of your build, which is what makes it low impact. And then finally, you will get Fey Ancestry, which we just talked about with the Drow. If you want more details, go there, but this is a phenomenal ability because it gives you immunity to sleep. Now, not listed here, and actually Drows get this as well, I just forgot to mention it, is Keen Senses. All elves gain Keen Senses, which gives you proficiency in the perception skill. Again, it doesn't display it, but if you go to your skills, you'll see you're proficient in perception without actually having to put a skill into it. That is a nice feature. Perception is very useful in this game, both in combat and out of combat. All elves get that, and Drow get that. So now let's go over the sub-races, starting with High Elf. High Elves will get a cantrip of your choice. So you get to pick from the Wizard cantrip list. This will use Intelligence as its spellcasting modifier, which is really a shame, to be honest. The thing is Intelligence is only really useful on Wizards as a base class, and Wizards don't need the cantrip because they can scribe scrolls to get all the cantrips they need. Now for subclasses, the Arcane Trickster and the Eldritch Knight use intelligence, and this can be good at them, but that is very niche of just 2 subclasses that this is useful on. So overall, I don't consider the High Elf cantrip to be that impactful of an ability. It can be good if you are going Arcane Trickster or Eldritch Knight, but other races that get spells usually get more than just a cantrip. So overall, the big selling points of the High Elf are all the base elf features, and there are other better races that give you those same features. So I give the High Elf a B tier. Next up is Wood Elf. On top of everything else that elves get, they get Fleet of Foot, which increases their movement by 1 unit, or 1.5 meters, 5 feet if you use feet. And then not displayed here is they also get proficiency in Stealth, the same way elves would get proficiency in Perception. Stealth is probably the best skill in the game, in my opinion. So they're getting free proficiency in 2 of the best skills in the game. That's awesome. They're getting an extra movement that stacks with everything else in your build. That's also good. The Wood Elves is in this interesting place where they're getting a lot of useful features, but not really build-defining features. But still, to me, it's enough for me to give them an A tier. I consider Wood Elves to be pretty good. It's hard to go wrong selecting a Wood Elf. Next up, Githyanki. We're actually going to go to Lae'zel for this. Githyanki are getting a few things. They have a base racial speed of 9 meters per turn. That's standard. They get the Martial Prodigy ability. This gives them proficiency in light and medium armor. Excellent. As well as proficiency with short swords, long swords, and great swords. This one's interesting. The proficiency in the great sword is cool because there's a lot of good great swords in the game. That said, classes that would benefit from wielding a greatsword are usually classes that already get proficiency in it. So the big thing you're getting here is the armor proficiency. Great for casters that otherwise wouldn't get it. I still prefer shields over medium armor, but medium armor is good, especially if you have items in your build like boots, gauntlets, or helmets that are medium armor that really tie your build together. You want that proficiency for them. So that's a impactful feature for sure. They're also going to get a spell portfolio at level 1. As you can see, they get Mage Hand, but it's a modified version of Mage Hand, which is invisible. To me, this functions pretty much the same as any Mage Hand. And Mage Hand is useful for solving a lot of puzzles outside of combat. Inside of combat, not that impactful. But besides that, at 3rd level, they will get the Jump spell, which they can cast once per long rest. Jump is amazing. It gives you so much mobility, especially if you are a strength-based character. And then at 5th level, they will get Misty Step once per long rest. Another amazing mobility spell. So the spell portfolio that Githyanki offer is just basically mobility spells. So best suited for melee strikers. That's what I like to run my Githyanki as. And they're phenomenal spells for that. They definitely impact your build. And then finally, there is Astral Knowledge. Astral Knowledge gives you proficiency in all skills of a chosen ability. So, for example, if we go to our skills here, Acrobatics, Sleight of Hand, and Stealth are all skills that use your Dexterity. So if you use Astral Knowledge Dexterity, you will get proficiency in all 3 of these skills. What this is offering you is so many skill proficiencies. And then this actually, you can cast once per long rest, and it lasts until your next long rest. So you get to choose different skills at different days. One day you could have Dexterity for Sleight of Hand. The next you could maybe have Intelligence for a bunch of History of Religion checks on the way. Some of the skills in this game are highly impactful. You can bypass entire boss fights with a good skill roll. So being able to select the skills that you choose, tailor them in your run for the skill rolls that you are about to face, so good. I think this is a highly impactful ability, Astral Knowledge. So altogether, Githyanki are offering you a lot. Great spells, a ton of skills, light and medium armor proficiency for caster classes, and even some weapon proficiencies. Altogether, I give the Githyanki an A tier and an S tier for fun. I love playing Githyanki. Lae'zel gets a huge boost in my team compositions because of her racial bonuses. It's a big deal. So, A tier for Githyanki. Next up on our list is Gnomes. There are 3 subraces of Gnomes, but first, for their base racial features, all Gnomes will get a racial speed of 7.5 meters. That is 1 less than standard, so it's not really a feature, it is a negative. Again, it's very easy to get enough movement in this game, even with the -1 from your race. Doesn't really impact builds that much. Then they also get Gnome Cunning. This gives them advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. Wow. The big one here is wisdom. So many debilitating effects target wisdom. Getting advantage on every single wisdom saving throw, incredible. And then intelligence and charisma aren't even that uncommon either. This is just so good. This gives you so much durability. One of the best features in the game, hands down. And all gnomes get that. But now let's go over what the subraces get. Starting with Rock Gnome. Rock Gnomes will get Dark Vision 12 meters. We've talked about that a lot. I don't consider this a very impactful feature. And they will get Artificer's Lore, which adds twice your proficiency bonus to history checks. Which is pretty neat. This isn't just proficiency, it's expertise. But it's expertise in history, which is mostly just a flavor skill. There aren't really useful ways to use history to get anything in combat that I know of in my several playthroughs of the game so far. So I like Rock Gnome a lot because, I mean, you're getting Gnome Cunning, and that's already enough to make you one of the best races in the game, and the expertise in history is just kind of cool flavor. Anyways, I give Rock Gnome a B tier, actually, which might be unfair. The thing is that Deep Gnome gives everything that you want in a gnome plus extras. So, the reason Rock Gnome is B tier is that it just gets so badly outcompeted by Deep Gnome. But playing as a Rock Gnome doesn't feel like playing as a lot of other B tier races. It's actually pretty good just for Gnome Cunning. So, next up is Forest Gnome. It also gets a 12 meter dark vision, and it gets the ability to speak with animals. So you cast this on yourself once per long rest, and it lasts until your next long rest. So it's basically a passive feature to speak to all animals in the game, which is very cool, except that there are potions that already do this, and there's enough potions that you can get one every long rest easily. So this is basically a nothing feature. I should probably give the Forest Gnome an RP tier because there's just always a better option. Actually, yeah, that is what I give the Forest Gnome, RP tier. But it's just because it gets so badly outcompeted. Any race that gets Gnome Cunning is already going to be pretty good. So, and then finally we get to the cream of the crop here, Deep Gnome. I mean, wow, this race is so good. Let's go over it. So on top of Gnome Cunning, they're going to get Superior Dark Vision. Incredible. We've already talked about it with a lot of the other races like Duergar or Drow. You can go back to those portions to hear me discuss it. And then they're going to get Stone Camouflage, which gives them advantage on stealth checks. Stealth, I've already said it, is the most important ability in this game. And getting proficiency in stealth is nice, but you can usually get that in other ways. Advantage on every stealth check, that is a feature which you cannot easily get from other parts of your build, right? So, 2 highly impactful features to combine with Gnome Cunning, already one of the best durability features in the game. This puts Deep Gnome at an easy S tier. Such an incredible race to play. Mostly tanky, they have a range build option and a stealth option. Deep Gnome Rogues, amazing. Yeah, just so good. So, the only problem with Deep Gnome, which might knock them down a tier in your estimation, is that they're still probably worse than Duergar, right? Because Duergar aren't getting that proficiency, that advantage on stealth checks, but they are just getting a limitless cantrip version of invisibility. So that kind of is better. And then they're also getting Superior Dark Vision, and they're getting their own version of Gnome Cunning, which gives them advantage on checks against a paralyzed condition. Not as good as Gnome Cunning, but It's like 60% of the way there, because the real reason you want advantage on wisdom saving throws is to resist paralyze, right? Anyways, I think Gnome Cunning's good enough on top of these other things to earn Deep Gnome and S tier. Anyways, that's enough about gnomes. Next up on our list is Half-Elves. Half-Elf base features. They have a racial speed of 9 meters, that's standard. They're going to get Civil Militia. This is something Larian has added to the game. Half-Elves and humans get it. With Civil Militia, you have weapon proficiencies in spears, pikes, halberds, and glaives. So basically all of the pole arms in the game. The only pole arm that isn't on this list is quarterstaff, but most classes get proficiency in quarterstaff anyways. Civil Militia also gives you armor proficiency with light armor and shield proficiency. So yes, in Baldur's Gate 3 you can get shield proficiency through your race if you pick either a half-elf or a human, and it's really, really good, especially because there's some phenomenal shields in this game that are basically tailor-made for casters, and the cleric and the druid are the only caster classes that usually get shield proficiencies. I guess Valor Bard, but you don't really want to go Valor Bard. We'll talk about that when I get to my class tier list, but basically if you're playing many of the caster classes like Warlock, Wizard, Sorcerer, and you want to use these shields that are great for spellcasters, you kind of have to pick Civil Militia. So, yeah, really good, basically. I really like Civil Militia. I prefer it over the medium armor proficiencies that other races give you. I consider this a highly impactful race feature. They also get Dark Vision 12 meters. We've talked about that a lot. You can go back in the video to hear discussion of that. And then they get Fey Ancestry. Again, we've talked about this a lot. You can go back to Drow, I believe, is where I talk about it in depth. Now let's go to the sub-races, starting with High Half-Elf. They will get the High Elf cantrip, the same as the High Elf that we talked about earlier. This isn't very good. So the High Half-Elf is in the same situation that the High Elf was in, where the good features that you get from the race, you can easily get by picking another kind of elf or half-elf. So there isn't really a good reason to pick High Half-Elf. Nevertheless, I can't give them RP tier because there's a few niche cases where you might want the choosable cantrip. So altogether, I give High Half-Elf a B tier. Wood Half-Elf gets Fleet of Foot, same feature that Wood Elves get. And then I believe if we go... yes, they're also getting the Stealth proficiency that Wood Elves get. So Stealth proficiency plus 1.5 meters. We talked about this when we covered Wood Elf. These are both good things to have. They're not really build defining, but it's neat to have. So on top of everything else that Wood Half-Elves get just from being a half-elf, I give the Wood Half-Elf an A tier. I think this is probably the best half-elf. And then there's the Drow Half-Elf. They're going to get the portfolio spells that Drow get, which is Dancing Lights at level 1, Fairy Fire at level 3, Darkness at level 5. It's useful, but not highly impactful. Yeah, I give the Drow Half-Elf a B tier. Mostly, I just think in 90% of the cases where you want what Half-Elves give you, you'll probably want to go Wood Half-Elf. It's just the best choice. Next up, we've got Half-Orc. There are no sub-races of Half-Orc, so we can just cover all of their race features here. They get a base movement speed of 9 meters, that is standard. Dark vision of 12 meters, we've talked about this a lot. It's nice, but not highly impactful. Then they get Relentless Endurance. This is a unique racial feature. If you reach 0 hit points, you regain 1 hit point instead of becoming down, and I believe this refreshes on a long rest. Really good. It's basically like the spell Death Ward. Once per long rest, always cast on you. That's really, really good. In combat, what this is going to do is waste 1 extra enemy attack to keep you downed. Or if you're really, really lucky, it'll actually keep you alive for 1 more round to make an attack. So good. And this is good on everybody. There isn't a class or build in the game that doesn't benefit from this. Amazing. And then on top of that, they get Savage Attacks. When you land a critical hit with a melee weapon, you deal an extra dice of weapon damage. So this is a little bit confusing, but in Baldur's Gate 3, just like in 5e, whenever you score a critical hit, you're going to take all of your damage dice and roll double of them and add that up, and then you add your flat bonuses as normal. So it's only the damage dice that are quote-unquote doubled, rather than the flat bonuses that you get from, say, strength or the enchantment of your weapon and stuff like that. With savage attacks, it's going to triple specifically your weapon damage dice. So for example, if I am using, in this case, a quarterstaff, which I'm holding in 2 hands, that is a 1d8 damage dice for that weapon. Normally, when you'd score a critical hit, you'd roll 2d8 for it. But if you are a half-orc, you will roll 3d8. So you're going to get the most out of this on any build that is expecting to critical hit a lot, or any build which wants to use the weapons with really good damage dice. And that's basically the heavy 2-handed weapons. So altogether, what the orc has is one amazing feature which works on every class in the game, and another amazing feature which works specifically with melee weapon strikers optimally, but any kind of weapon striker. And it makes a half-orc just so good in so many circumstances. I mean, it's one of the best striker races in the game because this is the only racial feature that really adds damage other than the Dragonborn's breath weapon, which sucks, as we've already talked about. So awesome. Savage Attack's awesome. And then Relentless Endurance, also amazing. This is an S tier race, easily, hands down. Half-Orcs are good on every single build that you can think of. So S tier for Half-Orcs. Next up, Halfling. This one's really going to shake some people up because the spoilers here is that Halfling, any variation of Halfling, is the master race. These guys are head and shoulders better than every other racial option that you can pick in the game in pretty much every single build. They're just so incredible. It's really hard to not play as a Halfling, except for some reason, they have like the reverse Dragonborn effect where they look really stupid in game. Just like the way they run, the posture. I mean, look at this guy. Anyways, let's go over the base racial features. Halflings have a movement speed of 7.5. It's 1 less than average, but again, that -1 to your movement isn't really going to matter. You can very easily get enough movement in this game to do what you need to do. Then they're going to get the lucky feature. This is the thing that makes Halflings so good. Whenever you roll a 1 on an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. So by the way, guys, that's pretty much every single die 20 roll in the game. If you roll a 1, you can re-roll the die, but you must use the new roll. Now, 1s are critical misses or critical failures. They always fail. If you're making an attack, it's going to miss. It doesn't matter if you have enough bonuses to hit with a roll of a 1, it always misses. If you're making a skill check, it always fails. If you're making a saving throw, it always fails. So that means every other race in the game has a 5% chance of failing at any task. And there's so many die 20 tasks in this game, you will critical fail often. But not if you are a Halfling. If you are a Halfling, that 1 in 20 chance of failure becomes a 1 in 400 chance of failure. That is only if you roll a 1 and then roll another 1 immediately after. Now, that will happen sometimes because statistically you're going to do more than 400 die 20 rolls with your Halfling in the game, but it's so seldom, and that just gives the Halfling so much reliability. And then it's also just a bonus that you get on every die 20 roll in the game. Even a small bonus on every single die 20 roll in the game will add up to so much impact over the long run that it just dwarfs anything else that any other race offers you. Lucky is so overpowered. It's so incredible. And this is why it's really hard to play as anything that isn't a Halfling. And then on top of that, they will get Brave, which gives them advantage on saving throws against being frightened. This is impactful, but not highly impactful. And that is the base race of Halfling. Now let's go over what their sub-races give, starting with Lightfoot Halfling. Lightfoot Halflings will get Naturally Stealthy, which gives them advantage on stealth checks. Holy crap! This is so good. We already talked about a comparable feature that deep gnomes get. Stealth is really, really good. Getting advantage on it, amazing. So you're getting advantage on top of lucky. If you stack up enough stealth, you will pass every stealth check that aren't absurdly high DC, reliably. This is amazing in combination with the improved invisibility spell, and just altogether an incredible ability. Highly impactful on top of the already stacked kit that Halflings get. It is S+ tier for Lightfoot Halflings. They might be the best race in the game. The only real competition they have is Strongheart Halflings, who get Strongheart Resilience. This is the equivalent of Dwarven Resilience. It does the same thing, it just has a different name. It's advantage on saving throws against being poisoned and resistant to poison damage. This is particularly good early, where some of the boss fights in the game deal a lot of poison damage. And then again, it's advantage on a saving throw against a fairly common but not that debilitating debuff. Still, these two races just offer so much. I mean, they're already really good if they didn't have lucky, and then they get lucky, which is the best race feature in the game. Halflings and BG3 are just a power gamer's dream. From an optimization standpoint, they pretty much muscle out everything else in the game as far as impact goes, so you should pretty much always pick them if you are optimizing. But other classes do offer good things, like the Duergar, the Deep Gnome, the Half-Orc. All of those are also S tier and worth picking. But yeah, Halflings are in a league of their own. S+++. Amazing. And I've gushed enough about them. Let's move on now. We're down to the last two now. Next up is Human. For their base racial features, humans gain 9 meters movement speed per turn. They get the Civil Militia ability, the same as the Half-Elves. This is proficiency in polearms, as well as light armor and shields. And it's the shields that really makes this a standout feature. And then they get Human Versatility. Select an additional skill to be proficient in, and your carrying capacity is increased by a quarter. And this is it. There's no sub-race of human. Just like in real life, all humans are the same. Sadly, what they offer isn't that good. The big thing here is Civil Militia, but if you want Civil Militia, you're pretty much best off going Half-Elf, because you can combine it with Fey Ancestry, and that's going to be better than Human Versatility in pretty much every circumstance, unless you really want that skill to be proficient in. This is a selectable skill. You can see here, any skill in the game, you just get to pick it. Now, which ones realistically are you going to pick? Stealth is probably the best choice, maybe Perception, or some of the Charisma skills. But if you remember, Wood Half-Elf already gets proficiency in Stealth, probably the most valuable one you are likely to pick. So yeah, honestly, Human really just... I can't imagine a world where it outcompetes going Wood Half-Elf. And for that reason, I give Human an RP tier. That said, I play humans all the time because I just like playing a human. Thematically, to me, picking a human is like picking a vanilla theme so that you can focus on the themes of your class rather than the themes of your race. All of these other races have their own kind of themes which might draw away from or clash with the theme concepts of your class. So yeah, I pick humans all the time, even though they are RP tier. That leaves us with the last race in the game, Tieflings. Tieflings come in 3 varieties, but of course, first we're going to talk about their base racial features. They have a movement speed of 9 meters, that's standard. They get dark vision 12 meters, that's practically standard. And then they get hellish resistance, which gives them resistance to fire damage. Now, fire damage is a very common type, but you can also get resistance to it fairly commonly. I mean, if you can predict when the fire damage is incoming, it's as easy as casting the first level Create Water spell on your party. That will last for 3 rounds and it'll give you resistance to fire damage. I don't value fire resistance as much as I value some of the other resistances, but still, it is an impactful feature. And then we can go to their subraces. What all of these subraces of Tiefling give you is a unique spell portfolio. So we'll go over them one at a time, starting with Asmodeus Tiefling. Their spells at level 1, they get Produce Flame. This is an attack cantrip which can also shed light in a small radius, but that's not important for us. We already have Dark Vision. As an attack cantrip, it's 1d8 fire damage with a very low range. I don't value it that highly. This will use Charisma as your attack stat, by the way. So if you do want to use this, it is best for any Charisma caster. There are many in this game. At level 3, they will get Hellish Rebuke, which they can cast once per long rest. Hellish Rebuke is a good spell, but it's a spell you kind of want to spam, not once per long rest. It's really not that impactful that way. And then at level 5, they will get Darkness, the same as Drow. What's to say about it? I don't know. Darkness is okay. The spell portfolio isn't really that good. I give Asmodeus Tiefling a C tier. Next up, Mephitstopheles Tiefling. They will get Mage Hand as a cantrip. Mage Hand is actually a very useful cantrip for solving out-of-combat puzzles. In combat, it's not really doing that much. At 3rd level, they will get Burning Hands, which they can cast 1 per long rest, but this version of Burning Hands is cast as if it's a 2nd level spell, so it is upcast by 1 level. Still, though, not very useful just because it takes your action, and not that efficient of a spell for your action. It gets outscaled very quickly. And then finally, at 5th level, they will get Flameblade. Now, Flameblade is actually interesting, and if you are familiar with my work in Early Access, I've experimented with Flameblade a lot. The new version of the spell on full release no longer requires concentration. It only lasts 10 rounds, and it is automatically summoned into your offhand if you are dual-wielding when you cast the spell. And I guess altogether that makes it a better spell than what it was in Early Access. That said, I find it much less interesting now because you're only getting it for a 1 combat span, whereas before it lasted for as long as you maintain concentration, which means you could really build around it. Still though, it's useful, especially if you summon it into your offhand. There's a lot of casters which don't have efficient actions to do with their bonus action, and summoning a Flameblade into your offhand, which uses your Charisma to attack with, very good, especially on sorcerers. I consider Mephitstopheles Tieflings to be good on sorcerers, but on everything else, kind of meh. I give them a C tier. Last up is Zariel Tiefling. This is probably the best version of the Tiefling. For their spells, at level 1 they get the Thaumaturgy cantrip. This is very useful for intimidation and performance checks, which are mostly out of combat. At 3rd level they get Searing Smite, an upcasted version of Searing Smite as if it is a 2nd level spell. Still though, Searing Smite really isn't that good, and once per long rest, it's just adding a little bit of damage, nothing to write home about. And then at 5th level, they get Branding Smite. Now this one is actually good. Branding Smite adds some Radiant damage, and Radiant damage is a damage type you can really build around, which is fun. But the most important thing is it prevents creatures from going invisible. And there's lots of combats in this game where targets will go invisible and it will really ruin your day. Branding, smiting them before they can go invisible, awesome. And so that's the kind of racial spell that I actually like. It's the thing that is really impactful every now and again, so that once per long rest limitation isn't gating it. So Zariel Tiefling I do consider the best of the Tieflings, but still C tier for Zariel Tiefling. So it's C tier for all of the Tieflings. And that is it for the races. So that is my video on the race tier list. Now, last thing I want to take a note of is how I'm going to be updating this going forward, because I'm sure I will be learning many things about the game which may change these rankings, and I don't want to make a new video every single time. So here's what I'm going to do. This video will stand alone as the core of my thoughts on ranking the races in Baldur's Gate 3, but I will also have a reference sheet where I discuss all of this in writing on my website. And I will be updating that reference sheet, which will be linked in the description for any changes in the future. So if you're watching this video a year from now, or 5 years from now, I'm sure many of the opinions that I have remain relevant, but if you want to know any updates, please refer to the reference sheet on my website. The link is in the description. If you're watching this video the same week that it's released, I'm actually working on that reference sheet right now, so it's probably going to be on my website within the week, within the next 7 days or so. So, not there yet, but once it's there, the link will be in the description. Since the full release of the game, I've been so busy that I've neglected a really important job, which is recognizing and thanking my supporters on Patreon. Patreon is such a big financial but also moral support for me, and I cannot thank them enough for what they've done. Frankly, I can't thank them all by name anymore because in the last few months, the list of supporters has grown so long it would take too long to read off the names on my videos. So from now on, I'll be only reading the names of my S tier supporters on Patreon, but I want my A and B tier supporters to know I really appreciate what you've done. Even if it's just $1 for 1 month, every little bit counts. Thank you. Now to my S tier patrons, Alcaris, Jeff, Marchitar, Root 1, Todd, Aurelian, thank you so much, you guys. And of course, a special thank you to the guy who started it all, C.A. Castaway. Gentlemen, I won't let you down.